Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the Nordic Cultural Centre. I'd like to welcome you all of you that are here today, and also around 200 people, I believe, who are joining us online. So welcome to our seminar. The seminar is entitled The Nordic Approach for Ambitious Carbon Market Cooperation under the Paris Agreement, Article 6. And I hope that we'll have a very interesting session for you today. Very privileged to have Mr. Haavisto here today, and I'm sure we'll have some very good discussions and speakers later on. So with no further ado, I will pass you first of all to Trond, who is our Managing Director, the Managing Director of Nefco. So please, Trond, if you could say a few words.
Thank you, Ash. Foreign Minister Haavisto, ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of Nefco and Gaia, I wish you a warm welcome to today's seminar. It's good to see that we have almost a full house here today at the Nordic Finance Hub and Culture Point. And also, like Ash said, a very large audience with us online, so welcome to you too. Before we start, I would like to tell you a little bit about Nefco and why this event is important for us. We call ourselves the Nordic Green Bank. The 5 Nordic countries own us jointly, and we only have one task. That is to accelerate the green transition by financing innovative Nordic green solutions that have the potential to have a significant impact and to be scaled up globally. We finance small and medium-sized Nordic companies and also Nordic initiatives like this one. We have also financed many environmental projects in Eastern Europe, where we continue to work in Ukraine even today, having recently launched a green recovery program for Ukraine, where the focus is on building back better, sustainably and green. At Nefco, we have a bottom-up approach. We engage early and work on the ground with concrete projects. We make projects happen. And our aim is that the projects we do will set examples and become bankable, as we like to call it, so that traditional finance sources will also be attracted. We believe that the real risk today is not going green. We believe financing should flow to the greenest projects, which are also, in fact, the most profitable when external costs of damages to the climate and nature are included in the calculations. Financing decisions must be based on the potential impact on a sustainable future, not past performance. We need to look forwards, not backwards. We believe, in fact, that all financing can and should be green. Now, a few comments on our experience in carbon markets. Nefco has been a pioneer in the carbon markets for almost 2 decades, since the Baltic Sea Testing Ground facility was established in 2003. And working in the spirit of Nordic cooperation, we have since managed several carbon funds for our owner countries. Now we continue to serve them as they aspire to meet the demanding Paris Agreement and national carbon neutrality targets, which Ash will talk more about soon. We are very glad to have this event here in Helsinki, as historically Finland has been an early mover in carbon markets and a participant in Nefco's carbon funds. And now, I'm very pleased to introduce the Foreign Minister of Finland, Mr. Pekka Haavisto. Mr. Haavisto has enormous experience in foreign policy issues and the environment, including impacts of war and peace processes. We are delighted that you could come here today and give some opening words to set this seminar in a global perspective of what really matters today. Mr. Haavisto, warm welcome.
Thank you. Oh. Great to be here, ladies and gentlemen, dear friends. I actually met some of my old colleagues like Mr. Jukka Uosukainen here, and we started to remember the Kyoto Climate Conference. I have to say that I learned a lot of how to act as a chairman or chairperson during the climate conference, because in the end of the conference, the chairperson asked any objections And then I could see at least 3 hands raising up, and the chairman was looking. I cannot see any hands. Decided. So this was the way how Kyoto finally came to the force. I also actually remember my Japanese colleague bursting into tears, and I was thinking that the minister was crying for the happiness, but he said that no, this -6, -7, -8%, whatever were the promises, will ruin the Japanese economy. And it hasn't been ruining Japanese economy, and it has not been ruining any economies in my knowledge. So, but that was the beginning of the climate decision making, and now of course we are talking about the much higher and more ambitious percentages. So lovely to see so many of you at this important event on carbon markets, and thank you Nefco for inviting all of us here today. I'm very pleased to participate in this event and share a few words in my capacity as Foreign Minister of Finland on carbon markets, but first we have to start with the reality we are living in today. It's no longer possible to turn a blind eye to climate change. We are already seeing serious adverse impacts to people, nature and infrastructure from increasingly frequent and severe extreme climate and weather events. I have to say that we are now, of course, in an unfortunate situation when Russia has attacked Ukraine, but the last meeting I had last year with my Russian colleague, Mr. Lavrov, he underlined that finally also the scientists in Russia are believing that the climate change is true when the pipelines, oil pipelines, gas pipelines were collapsing in the permafrost area in the northern Russia, and it has serious economic consequences to Russia. So hopefully one day we can return also with Russia on more important issues like the climate. Global warming and increases in climate extremes have reduced food and water security widely, in some places pushing millions of people into acute food and water crisis. I'm sure we have all heard, for example, about the devastating floods in Pakistan this year and the floods in Germany and Central Europe in 2021. The impacts of climate change are hindering efforts to meet many of the Sustainable Development Goals. Limiting the rise in global temperature to 1.5 degrees would help limit the severity of impacts. Even though progress has been made in global climate action, including many new net zero pledges in the past year, we are still far from the 1.5 degrees path. For that, we need to make rapid, deep cuts in greenhouse gas emissions and make clear long-term plans for net zero. Finland aims at being climate neutral already by 2035 and thus the world's first fossil-free welfare state. We will achieve our target by sharply reducing emissions and strengthening our carbon sinks. Friends, achieving the ambitious goals of the Paris Climate Agreement requires directing financial flows to low emission and climate resilient activities all over the world. Putting a price on greenhouse gas emissions, so-called carbon pricing, and fossil fuel subsidy reform are the tools to make finance flows consistent with the transition to low carbon economies. Therefore, carbon pricing is a key tool for combating climate change. Effective carbon pricing, through emissions trading or carbon taxes, steers societies, including the private sector, towards a transition to carbon neutrality. For carbon pricing to be effective, fossil fuel subsidies, which constitute a negative carbon price, should be reformed and phased out in parallel. Carbon pricing is also one of the most cost-efficient ways to cut emissions, and carbon markets are one way to realize this. Many countries aim to engage in international carbon markets to achieve their emission reduction targets under the Paris Agreement. This creates opportunities also for the private sector. Finland has pioneered carbon pricing for the past 30 years. In 1990, Finland became the first country in the world to use carbon tax as a climate policy tool. Since 2005, around half of our emissions have been covered by the EU emissions trading system. Our experience is that carbon pricing is one of the best ways to drive the low carbon transformation systematically. In addition, we have supported carbon pricing and carbon markets development globally for over 20 years, since the inception of international carbon markets. Finland was at the forefront of developing the international carbon markets under the Kyoto Protocol. We supported some of the world's first project activities and market transactions under the Kyoto Protocol's Clean Development Mechanism, CDM, and joint implementation, GI. In total, Finland supported over 160 climate projects or programs under CDM and GI in 34 countries through 6 international carbon funds and 10 bilateral projects. Our bilateral project reduced greenhouse gas emissions through introducing small hydro in Honduras, solar cooking in China, and landfill gas to energy in Jordan, to name but a few. Our international support for carbon pricing contributed to the development of rules and capacity for the international carbon markets under the Kyoto Protocol. It strengthened carbon market capabilities both in Finland and in the host countries and promoted the development of institutional capacity. These lessons and expertise are invaluable when developing carbon markets in the era of the Paris Agreement. Concrete emissions reduction projects developed the capacities of both public and private sector to identify emission reduction potential and measure the climate impact of projects in accordance with international standards. Besides reducing emissions, the projects and programs can contribute also to other sustainable development goals in the host countries. For example, increase access to energy, improve energy efficiency and air quality, and create jobs. In the Paris era, Finland continues to support international collaboration to promote robust carbon pricing policies and carbon markets that enhance transformative change, ambition, promote sustainable development, and foster private sector participation and innovation. In accordance with Finland's 2030 Agenda Implementation Plan from 2017 and Government Programme 2019, Finland strives for an effective implementation of the Paris Agreement and promotes carbon pricing, fossil fuel subsidy reform, and carbon footprint accounting globally. Although Finland's initial NDC, or the EU's, which Finland is part of, for 2030 does not include any international use of carbon markets, Finland supports the development of robust international rules for market-based cooperation under Article 6 of the Paris Agreement. Dear friends, I, like everyone else, was delighted that at COP26 in Glasgow last year, there was finally a negotiation outcome on Article 6, the part of the Paris Agreement dealing with international carbon markets. This was a long negotiated outcome and a step forward. However, the finalization, operationalization and piloting of the rules under Article 6 continues, and international efforts are needed for this. At its best, the international carbon market can make it possible to raise the level of ambition, speed up international climate cooperation, and increase the flexibility and cost effectiveness of climate action. For this to happen, we need robust carbon market rules. In December 2019, Finland joined the San Jose Principles for High Ambition and Integrity in International Carbon Markets that constitute the basis upon which a fair and robust international carbon market should be built. Through the Nordic Initiative for Cooperative Approaches, NICA, and I want to thank Nefco for the coordination and fellow Nordic countries for the good cooperation. We have since 2019 been contributing to the development of international carbon market rules of the Paris era. NICA has been one of the pioneers in this through the wealth of information produced through analysis and studies. We continue to support our developing country partners in carbon pricing directly too. Through the Partnership for Market Implementation, a fund managed by the World Bank, Finland is contributing to building readiness for carbon markets and planning and implementation of carbon pricing instruments in its partner countries. Currently, there are ongoing activities in over 15 countries with this support, of which most are interested in international cooperation under Article 6. The fund's predecessor, the Partnership for Market Readiness, which operated in 2011 to 2020 and was also funded by Finland, supported, for example, emission trading systems in China, Kazakhstan, Colombia and Mexico, emission tax in Argentina, Chile, Colombia, Mexico, Costa Rica, South Africa and Panama, and emission compensation systems in Costa Rica, South Africa and Thailand. In addition, Finland is a founding member of the Coalition of Finance Ministers for Climate Action and current chair alongside Indonesia. The coalition works on how the ministries of finance could bring added value to the implementation of climate goals and how the role could be made permanent in international climate negotiations. The added value of the finance ministers would be that climate action would be linked to economic policy, public finance management and financial solutions in accordance with the so-called Helsinki principles. The coalition has been active in organizing peer exchanges, capacity building and training on carbon pricing for its member finance ministries, now already in 78 countries. Finland is and has always been in the front line with regard to energy and carbon taxation. We advocate consistently for fossil fuel subsidy, reform and global carbon pricing in our foreign policy, be it in the trade policy realm or development cooperation. We are a member of the Friends of Fossil Fuel Subsidy Reform, FFSR group, founded in 2010 in the context of the G20. The group has consistently advocated for reforming fossil fuel subsidies. At the World Trade Organization, we are engaged in structured dialogues on trade and climate change, which include open discussions on carbon pricing. We are also supportive of initiatives such as the OECD Inclusive Framework on Carbon Mitigation Approaches, which was launched at the OECD ministerial meeting in June 2022. Overall, comprehensive and ambitious carbon pricing and carbon markets with robust safeguards ensuring environmental integrity are in our advantage also as they create a market for climate-friendly solutions. I believe in the Nordics we have plenty of climate-friendly products and services that would be useful elsewhere in getting us towards the 1.5 degree path. At the same time, our companies, municipalities and citizens may wish to utilize international crediting mechanisms to voluntarily accelerate their move towards climate neutrality or negativity. Finally, I want to leave you with another important aspect related to carbon markets. It's important that transition to a carbon neutral society is fair and just from a social and regional perspective and involves all sectors of society. We need to recognize that a just transition is ultimately about people and communities. All voices need to be heard, everyone needs to be involved, particularly those who are often overlooked. This includes women and girls, those whose lives are restricted by social norms and various forms of discrimination, and those whose livelihoods are already threatened by the climate crisis. To achieve a just transition, we need multi-stakeholder approaches that bring together diverse groups of stakeholders. With these words, I wish you a great event with many interesting discussions and insights. We look forward to continue to collaborate with all of you on these important topics also in the future. Thank you. Stay here.
Okay, thank you very much, Minister. Thank you for your comments. I think you've raised a lot of very interesting topics, and we thank you for your support, in particular of the role for carbon markets, of carbon pricing, and also highlighting some of the issues around private sector engagement, involvement, innovation, and also social justice. Let's not forget. Okay, so I think we're going to open for questions here. I think perhaps you can stay with us for a few minutes to answer a few of these questions. I guess we have a mic around somewhere.
It's there.
Is it there? Okay, we have a mic. But while you're thinking of your questions, perhaps if I could take my privilege here to just ask you. So here we are living in difficult times. We have war in Europe. We're living through a cost of living crisis, an energy crisis, and we have the ongoing climate crisis. In your view, what would be a successful outcome for Finland at the forthcoming COP, the COP in Egypt?
Well, this is a good question, and I discussed this also with the Egyptian Foreign Minister Sukri when I met him during the UN General Assembly now a couple of weeks ago in New York. And of course, the Egyptian view of the chair country or the hosting country is that the development and climate is the key issue, and how to guarantee the needed economic development in developing countries and fulfill the climate goals. And I said, of course, to Minister Sukri that what we are now trying to achieve in Europe, actually in a very rapid timetable, is the green transition, also due to fact that we want to make a separation with our energy systems and the fossil sources of Russia at this moment, and we want to make it even more rapidly than how it was planned. So we are, like we say in Europe, that with the short time frame, this looks quite a dangerous moment, you know, lack of energy shortcuts and so forth, but with a little bit longer perspective, we are really speeding also climate-friendly economy in European countries. And I think the same message should be out there also with the developing world. And I think this debate, I'm waiting very much in the COP27 to take place.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. Okay, so are there any questions from the audience? We can also take questions if there are online as well, so don't be shy, please. I'm sure... here we have a question. Maybe the lady in the front, if you could...
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I'm Tuuli Kaskinen from Climate Leadership Coalition. My question has to do with this question of going above carbon neutrality. We know we have to head into the world where we take more carbon off the atmosphere than what we put there. And that's then, of course, question of sinks and also technical sequestration. At the moment in Finland, there is a little bit this question of if we do more sinks, is it for government or do the good come to those who, for example, own the land? So would there be an opportunity for landowners to get profit from those actions, which would make increasing sinks possible? We know this is quite technical question, and we don't need to go to that. But from the more like philosophical point of view, how do you see the opportunities to get private funding into the field of sinks as well?
I think philosophically, I'm thinking that it would be good if the landowners can benefit of creating sinks and have a motivation of doing so. And also why I raised the CDM and GI operations also international. Now everybody is looking their own tools, so to say, on the climate policy, which is good. Of course, you have to have the national plans, but then you should go also to this cost-benefit thinking when we are addressing the whole problematic, and there we should use all kinds of tools. And I think all these global tools can be used, and these projects can be encouraged, but also, of course, domestically, how we could how landowners and others could benefit of the project that they are doing. I think we should create that kind of mechanism also nationally.
Okay, thank you.
There's one more.
Please.
Thank you. My name is Teppo Säkkinen from the Finland Chamber of Commerce. Minister, you have been recently at the United Nations General Assembly and had a chance to discuss with ministers from throughout the world. What is your impression of the atmosphere? Are countries keeping their commitments, their NDGs to the Paris goals, or due to the energy crisis and that we are also on the verge of a food crisis due to Russia's invasion, is there any talk of slacking with the commitments?
Well, I think one big debate that we have here in Europe is that, for example, the nuclear debate in Germany, that should some of the nuclear power be replaced with the coal and so forth. And as we have seen recent comments, many of us outside of Germany are thinking that this is maybe not a great idea to increase the coal power plants. But this is, of course, a more general, not only a European issue, that what energy form we are speeding up now if some sources of the fossil energy are lacking or the price is higher and so forth. And I think it's a combination. I had a meeting also with the foreign minister from Pakistan, for example, and where this immediate crisis like the flooding issues and others are overshadowing almost all other topics, and we have to find short-term solutions to issues like the flooding and then support country with the longer-term sustainable energy solutions. And I think this balance is of course now at stake when we are looking not only the energy crisis but the food crisis and all other issues that the Russian aggression against Ukraine has triggered. And my understanding actually why the grain deal was so successful with Ukraine and with Russia, and why UN, United Nations, put so much emphasis to get the grain deal was that we take hopefully one topic out from the table, the real shortage of the food at these circumstances, and that would give also for many African countries, for example, the possibility to concentrate on other topics as well as the immediate food crisis. And I think this is very important, that we at the same time look the short-term needs and then work for the long-term goals.
Okay, thank you. Do we have time for a final question? There's a gentleman back, please.
Hello, Juha Seppälä from Nordic Development Fund. I don't want it to be the last question, but a question. You mentioned that there are examples that in Cairo you'll be able to showcase on how to do green transition in this current situation. But is there something of a Nordic position that you'll be promoting in the COP, like Nordic solutions to the climate crisis? Thank you.
Well, I think Nordics, of course, are well known in, for example, in the European context, that we have been countries that have more or more ambitious climate goals and so forth. We have had a big effort also in the European Union, or European Union being more ambitious and so forth. So this is known, but also I think in our development policies, the issue of the climate has had a very big role, and I think this is the message from the Nordic countries. We had here in Helsinki 18 African ministers, foreign ministers in June, where we had the Nordic Africa ministerial meeting. It has a history of being a like-minded meeting, but nowadays, what is like-minded? Some people had another view on war in Ukraine that what the Nordic countries had and so forth. So we are not so like-minded, but on environmental issues, for example, we try to stress that we have very common views in our development policies with these African countries, that environment and climate should be one of the key priorities in our cooperation. And I think we should maintain these kind of links, and Nordic have some advantages, Nordic countries, and one of course is that our history is not the history of colonialism and so forth. We have been fighting against apartheid at the very early stage and against the colonialism on the African continent and so forth. So we have some advantages in our cooperation, for example, with African countries.
Okay, thank you. Maybe if I could indulge you with one last question, please. I would like to really get your reflections on what the role of the European Union could be in taking forward some of the initiatives that that you spoke about, and what particularly in regard to the carbon market, how can we bring Brussels along on this journey?
Well, of course, it's a big issue. Well, historically, of course, starting from Kyoto and so forth, I think European Union has been on the right side of the history of raising the climate issue and trying to be at least a little bit more ambitious than some others on setting the climate goals and reaching the climate goals and so forth. But I still think that even inside European Union, we need countries who are doing things a little bit ahead, and that's why I'm quite proud of the Finnish goal on climate neutrality and so forth. But I think the issue of technologies is the very key issue. It's about the sinks, how to create sinks, but it's also about the green technologies and so forth. And there, European Union, in my mind, could play even a bigger role in technology transfer to developing countries. And this is the key issue that is coming very often from developing countries, that yes, we could do this, but we need technologies, we need financing for these technologies and so forth. And there, again, the European Union and the European Union development portfolios could be very, very useful.
That's great. Okay, thank you so much for your time, and thank you for your kind words, and I'm sure the audience would like to express their gratitude also. But thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks.
Okay, thank you very much. So, so we move to the next part of the agenda, which is a short some words from Nefco, from myself, regarding the future perspectives of the carbon markets. I think so far we've seen that both research and practice has shown that the carbon market cooperation, working together, mobilizes the private sector to identify and realize the most cost-effective and, if well regulated, additional mitigation options and opportunities, making the best use of the limited investment resources that companies have. And this is something that was mentioned also by the Minister, that there are real opportunities for private sector innovation which we'd like to support. Nefco, the Nordic Environment Finance Corporation, has, as Trond mentioned earlier on, for 2 decades has been working as a specialist fund manager, working together with Nordic sovereigns and corporates. We've managed over 280 million euros of carbon funds. That is to say that we've been engaged in the origination, in the evaluation of projects. We've undertaken due diligence of these projects. We've managed quite large portfolios of projects across the world and undertaken the distribution of these credits that can be supportive to the participants in the funds. The story began in 2003 with the Baltic Sea Regional Energy Corporation, which was actually a creature of a multilateral arrangement at the time, the Baltic Sea Regional Energy Corporation, and it involved the 5 Nordic countries, and it involved also Germany. That grew over time to become a public-private partnership, and we also launched in 2008 the Nefco Carbon Fund, which similarly was a private sector and public sector initiative. We also continued in 2013 with a bilateral instrument called the Norwegian Carbon Asset Procurement Facility, NORCAP. And over the years, we've actually been able to build a lot of experience working with projects across the world. In total, the funds that we've managed, these 3 funds, have achieved quite significant emission reductions in the order of around 31 million tons of CO2 equivalent. That's roughly the emissions of Denmark, annual emissions of Denmark. And this has been achieved through a wide typology of projects and geographic areas. So I would say that carbon funds have been a pioneering testing ground, the name of our first instrument, for so-called market-based approaches. As was mentioned by the Minister, the Nordic countries have been early movers in the fledgling carbon markets of the time, and we'll hear more from Hanna-Mari later about this. And we're very confident that going forwards that we can continue to do so. And I'm very pleased that the Swedish Energy Agency will be here later on also to outline their experiences. We've also seen that the carbon funds have been a very cost-effective tool for achieving carbon mitigation. We've seen that, for example, for the Nefco carbon facility, the gross average weighted cost was in the order of around €5 per tonne of CO2 abated. And this is set against a market price of around between 20 to 30 euros at the time. So you can see that there are some very cost-effective options to be found. Another point I'd like to raise is that Nefco's carbon funds have had a very strong Nordic identity. This is something that runs right through this presentation. And alongside Nefco as a joint environmental international financial institution, which includes all the 5 governments, but of course based here in Helsinki. I'd like to also note that, as was noted by the Minister, that Finland has been a very strong supporter from the early days. Not only did it have its own carbon program at the time, but it was an early participant in Nefco's carbon funds. And we're very pleased that they've been involved in 2 of our funds, and also very happy to note that 7 Finnish industrial and energy companies have also been engaged in our activities and been part of the so-called investor community that we've had over the years. I think we'll also learn today that carbon finance plays a much broader green growth role, and we'll see later on some of the benefits that we have beyond emission reductions. So we've talked, the Minister mentioned technology transfer, but we also have a number of different other sustainable development impacts, for example, which I think we can touch on. Another issue I'd like to raise is really around carbon financing being a form of results-based financing. This is an instrument which links the extension of finance, of providing finance, to verified delivery of predetermined results. In this case, we're talking about emission reductions. But we have, since 2019 at Nefco, been engaged in a number of other instruments which provide support for development outcomes. This includes the Beyond the Grid Fund for Africa and the Modern Cooking Facility for Africa, which address rural energy access and clean cooking, respectively, using very much the same fund management principles and tools. And this leads me very nicely to Africa, a continent where Nefco is currently working. The Climate Policy Initiative has estimated that the continent requires around $277 billion annually in order to meet its nationally determined contributions. These are the pledges that they've made under the Paris Agreement, and to meet the 2030 climate goals. But currently, the climate finance flows are about a tenth of that, around 30 billion, and primarily public sector. So we can see that we need to catalyze more private finance, including domestic finance, in order to achieve these goals. And I believe also that carbon finance, if deployed to its full potential, can certainly play a role here. We know that there are nature-based solutions, particularly in agriculture, forestry, other land use sectors, which can offer very interesting and profitable market opportunities in Africa. We know that the sector's economic and social importance is such, and the implications for food security, gender, biodiversity, and water security are very pressing. And we also note that it has really only touched the surface. Around 1/6 of the climate finance in Africa flows to these sectors. And I believe that future carbon markets can play an important role going forwards. The Clean Development Mechanism, which is one of the tools under the Kyoto Protocol, largely bypassed Africa. But I believe that bilateral action undertaken particularly through the Nordic countries, for Nordic governments in particular, and the Article 6.2 of the Paris Agreement can go some way to redressing this. And going forwards, when we see the 6.4, the private sector mechanism under the Paris Agreement, when we see that mobilizing, I'm hopeful that Africa can also be a major host for emission reduction projects. So I'd like to sort of characterize the three generations of the carbon markets. Ones in which Nefco and the Nordic countries have played and will continue to play a pioneering role. The first generation was operating in the pre-Kyoto era, providing a valuable learning by doing experience, and we spoke about this before, the Baltic Sea Regional Energy Corporation, and it's very nice to see some friendly faces here who are participating in those instruments. The second generation, I would say, were the scaled-up compliance instruments, so the Nefco Carbon Fund, for example, and others, which engaged with private sector entities to help them meet their obligations under the EU emissions trading program, but also sovereign governments to meet their obligations under Kyoto. But I believe we're now moving into the third generation, and that's really the next generation of carbon markets, which will operate under the auspices of the Paris Agreement. And this is where we are here, and we're very pleased to note that there has been good progress. And these markets will provide a new framework for countries to collaborate on mitigation actions in order to meet these nationally determined contributions. So I think it was mentioned by the Minister, and we'll discuss more about this later on, but I'd like to, and I'm grateful for the Minister to introduce this topic of the NICA, or the Nordic Initiative for Cooperative Approaches. As mentioned, it's an initiative that's been working since 2019. It involves Nefco, the Nordic Council of Ministers, Finland, and the other Nordic countries. And it seeks to operationalize international market-based collaboration under Article 6. And we'll learn more about this in the next presentation. But going forward, Nefco seeks to foster these partnerships between Nordic actors, including private and municipal actors, and their global peers, to try and achieve the real and lasting, enduring mitigation outcomes, to promote greater ambition, to try and harness the private sector engagement, and to promote the innovation that the Minister talked about today, whilst also delivering sustainable development and, as he mentioned, also climate justice, or just transition. So following in the pioneering tradition of the Nefco carbon funds, NICA activities aim to contribute to the development of robust and practical international rules. These are now being developed for mitigation outcomes that can ensure that market-based cooperation under the Paris Agreement moves forward. And Nefco stands ready to contribute to the development of the next generation of carbon markets, working together with Finland and with Finnish actors. Okay, so I'll end my words here, but I would like to then move, I guess, to the next session, which is a hybrid panel. So we have some colleagues here, and we also have some online as well. But first of all, Hanna-Mari Ahonen from Perspectives will outline the vision, the approach, and the objectives of Nordic cooperation, the need for enhanced ambition, and the role of piloting. Next up, we're privileged then to have two of the early forerunners in this space, we have Mischa Classen from the KliK Foundation, who will be representing the Swiss approach and experience, and Sandra Lindström, who is joining us from Stockholm online, and they will both describe some of the early experiences in this developing field. And finally, in this session, we'll be joined also online by Hugh Salway from the Gold Standard Foundation, who will talk about some of the other key issues which will need to be addressed. For example, early capacity building, the need to promote integrity in this market, and ways of driving further some of the climate impact. So I thank you for your attention. I'm sure we'll have a very interesting session. We will have a Q&A after this session, but maybe if I could pass to Hanna-Mari. And Hanna-Mari, please, the floor is yours.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Hanna-Mari Ahonen, and I'm working for Perspectives Climate Group. And previously, I've also worked for the Finnish and Swedish governments and Nefco as well. So it's really great to be here and see lots of familiar faces from 20 years of carbon markets that I've been working on them. So yes, I'm really glad to be here. When I was preparing this presentation, I was feeling quite nostalgic because I started as a master's student with a Finnish pilot program. So looking backwards, but I promise also to talk a little bit going forward on the Nordic experience and the vision for the development of carbon markets. And then this would need to work. Anybody gonna help? Oh, now it works. Just a bit of patience. Okay, so the carbon markets have been around for over 20 years, starting with the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change. They had this activities implemented jointly pilot phase that developed some methodologies. And this paved way for the Kyoto mechanisms that we've talked about already today, CDMJI, and also the international emissions trading. And these now are paving way for the next generation of carbon markets under the Paris Agreement and its Article 6. So there's Article 6.2 cooperation that's based on national arrangements and cooperation between different countries, and an international mechanism for issuing carbon credits. And in parallel, there's also been the voluntary carbon markets developing. And now the Nordic countries and companies have been involved from the very beginning all the way through, and there's been ups and downs in the carbon markets in the past 20 years. And also now some of the first actors working on Article 6. And as it's already been mentioned, it's not just the countries, but also Nordic companies have been involved. And in different constellations. I only have 10 minutes, so I can't go through all of the things we've been doing in the past 20 years. But we've done them nationally with national programs, together with other Nordic countries, and then also together with other countries in international contexts. And resulting in hundreds of real-life projects and programs. Real-life projects, that's the thing that's been the best thing in my work, to really see what happens on the ground. But also methodology development and capacity building at the same time. And so the first lesson we've learned from Nordic Carbon Market Cooperation is that there's lots of different reasons to do it. And the Nordics have engaged in it for various different goals. The obvious one is to enhance cost effectiveness of meeting targets, but that's by no means the only reason. Another important reason is getting flexibility and a mitigation of risks, some kind of a risk buffer, just in case not everything goes exactly as planned. And we've seen in the past 20 years that things haven't gone exactly as planned in terms of national policies. So it brings a bit of flexibility when things go differently. And Nordic countries have already used the carbon market cooperation to raise ambition beyond targets and to deliver results-based climate finance. So we have examples that you can also use it for ambition raising. And while you're doing this cooperation, you're also developing the rules and the capacity and the experience as you go along. And you're supporting the markets in their development. And the activities themselves will support sustainable development and some of them technology transfer. So as the minister was already saying, this could be a great opportunity also to take Nordic solutions to other parts of the world. And finally, last but not least, government participation in the early market development can pave way for Nordic companies or other companies to access the carbon markets over time, which we've seen already in the Kyoto period, and to access compliance-grade carbon credits. And the good thing is that you don't need to fix your objectives from the beginning. So you can have many objectives, you can have one, and you can shift to others over time. So you can even use it for overachievement if you're very successful with your national policies. The second lesson is, if you want ambition, you need cooperation. So cooperation is all about doing more faster than what you could do alone. And carbon market cooperation is about bringing private sector together with the public sector to identify, to implement, and to finance mitigation actions. And often we think about the carbon market as an abstract place where some abstract units are being transferred and traded. But these units come from somewhere, and they come from real-life projects that have been developed together by someone before they enter the carbon markets. And that's the exciting part, is actually to have been working with these projects that generate these units. And the really, really important thing is that we ensure that these units represent real benefits, not only for the climate, but also environment and society. And this is the great thing about working at the Nordic level, is that you get to know your projects and pick them and evaluate them and originate them yourself, rather than outsourcing it to someone, because you really need to ensure the integrity, and by working together you can pick the projects that you want to support and the benefits you want to support. But first you need the motivation to do this, then you need a mandate to do that, you need resources and the capacity at least to get started, and then the capacity will build over time. And that's what we have in the Nordics. So the Nordics have said that they will catalyze global mitigation efforts towards 1.5 degrees. And they've noted that the Paris Agreement and Agenda 2030 show the way, but we have to do more and more ambitiously, faster. And this is where carbon market cooperation can help. And the third lesson is that piloting is a great tool to get started. It can support many different objectives at the same time, so it can cater for different reasons to participate. It can mobilize resources for the real action on the ground. And you don't need much resources to get started, but you actually end up with real projects that really illustrate and demonstrate what carbon cooperation is about. And you can build capacity by working on actual projects. It really changes it from abstract to concrete, I can tell you. And then once you've demonstrated the benefits to others through these real-life case studies, then maybe you can strengthen your mandate to scale up over time as well. So you can do it bit by bit with piloting. And that's what the Nordic countries have said they're going to be doing. So they have been piloting carbon markets since the very beginning, and they continue to do so under the Paris Agreement and its Article 6. So the piloting never really ends, it seems. And they want to stress the importance of having robust rules. That's something the minister also highlighted. And it's so important to have the robust rules so that you can enhance ambition and then safeguard against negative impacts. And under the Nordic Initiative for Cooperative Approaches, or NICA, that's been mentioned a few times already, we've developed a proposed vision for Nordic carbon market cooperation going forward. So the vision is that the Nordic actors would engage in international climate cooperation, carbon market cooperation, for the purpose of promoting ambition globally by working with environmentally and socially sustainable mitigation actions that are compatible with a transition to 1.5 degrees and the UN Sustainable Development Goals. So all of these boxes would need to be checked with Nordic cooperation. And it, of course, in practice means a lot of checking a lot more boxes as well. So the international criteria for carbon market cooperation comes from the Paris Agreement, and it's Article 6. And it requires you to ensure environmental integrity, promote ambition, that also comes from the Paris Agreement's requirements, apply robust accounting, also to avoid double counting, and promoting sustainable development. Now, Nordic cooperation can explore what this means in practice, in different contexts, in different activities, and develop tools through actual cooperation and examples. And also with promoting ambition, for example, you're picking partners that are also looking to cooperate to raise ambition. You're picking activities that are compatible with the long-term goal, avoiding lock-in of emissions and so forth. And especially with promoting sustainable development, the Nordic countries have been working on tools already in the Kyoto period. In the Kyoto period, you had it as an objective, but it wasn't systematically implemented and operationalized. So the Nordics have always been pointing that out, trying to work for operationalization of it, and testing different tools for both the positive and the negative impacts and their systematic assessment, and then their monitoring and reporting as well, and safeguards in place. And so this is one place where the Nordic governments and companies can lead by example in really doing this in a comprehensive way, showing that you can do it, and using these tools, and focusing on priority issues like the gender equality and support for adaptation, for example. And then there's other goals that we've heard already about today, enabling transformational change, fostering a just and inclusive transition. And these are really grand, but also really important goals. And Nordic cooperation can really explore what it means to operationalize these goals. What does it mean in practice in an activity? And what are the components that these big thoughts are made of? Then facilitating private sector participation has been mentioned many times, and it's really important because you really want to bring in the private sector's resources and innovation. The Nordics have always been embracing prompt action, despite it not being the easy way, and they continue to do so now also under the Paris Agreement. And it's really tempting to wait for everything to be ready and prepared before you get started, but if everybody waits, it will never get ready. And learning by doing, it's not easy, but it is really important. And I'm really, really proud of the Nordic countries and companies for embracing that prompt action, which is really not easy. But then you choose your partner as well, and find other partners that are also willing to learn by doing and make most of your experiences and your other networks and initiatives and activities so that you get your synergies on your side as well. Nordics have also cooperated on the voluntary side. So there's been a Nordic dialogue on voluntary compensation. It's been going on for about a year now, and it's about to wrap up. And what we're doing in that dialogue is aiming to align voluntary climate action with the Paris Agreement and Agenda 2030. And we've started with just getting a common understanding of the key issues, and I can say that's the bulk of the work. It really isn't easy, especially now that the terminology is not universal. And to get a common language so that we can co-create best practices for the voluntary use of carbon markets and carbon credits and then related claims at the Nordic level. And then we are recommending a Nordic community of best practice to continue working on best practices in carbon market cooperation and bringing also the voluntary and the Article 6 closer together. And then some final messages. There we go. So first of all, want to really emphasize that carbon market cooperation can be used for various objectives, for various purposes by public and private actors. And usually people have an idea of one or the other, but they don't exclude each other. And it's really about how you do carbon market cooperation. And the Nordics want to do it in a way that raises ambition. You can use it for that. It's not automatic. You need to check boxes. So you can raise ambition with carbon market cooperation if you use it in addition to your own ambitious action at home. and you base it on activities that are socially and environmentally sustainable. It's easier said than done, but it's so important that we do need to cooperate to get that one right and robustly accounted, including no double counting. So all three of these need to be checked for this to be ambition raising. And the good news is that learning by doing is the way to go. It's a very powerful tool. We don't need to get it right from the first day, and we certainly won't. And we don't need to. And we can develop rules and capacity and the markets all at the same time, and those real-life activities that I'm so fond of. And then partnerships of all types are really important. That's what cooperation is all about, but carbon market cooperation is especially about private and public coming together in partnership. And we have great examples, successful examples in the Nordics from the Kyoto period on public-private partnerships, and hopefully a lot more to come in the Paris Agreement's era as well, so that we can bring the private sector to help us develop the activities, but also to help them access Article 6 carbon credits. So with that, I thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, Hanna-Mari. And it's a very nice point at which to end. We're talking about cooperation and partnership going forwards. I will also bring your attention to the pamphlet that you may have seen outside. So we have a short briefing on the Nordic approaches to ambitious and inclusive carbon market cooperation. So it goes along with this. So please do take a look. It's only 4 pages. So. Okay, so I think with no further ado, I think we'll move to Mischa Classen, who is the Director for Carbon Procurement at the KliK Foundation. We will have an opportunity for questions both for Hanna-Mari and for Mischa and all the colleagues at the end of this session. So please save your comments for then. So please, Mischa.
So, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'm very pleased to have the honor to be here. My task is to showcase the Swiss approach to Article 6 on the UNFCCC. Switzerland, not a Nordic country, but a country that has gained a unique experience in the past few years. And I'd like to explain to you a little bit what role ambition plays in the Swiss approach, what the Swiss approach constitutes in, and where we stand now. So I think we're ready to go. It's a matter of seconds. Maybe manually? Oh, it's that way. Okay. So, ambition and the Swiss approach. So, this is very important to understand that Switzerland, under the Paris Agreement, has made a pledge. And Switzerland is not a country that has a lot of primary industry, no big polluters, no coal, quite a clean grid. And nevertheless, there was a clear feeling that Switzerland has to go ahead and therefore, and also against the background that the Kyoto period was considered as a quite successful system to flock in international and national measures, Switzerland decided to pledge a minus 30% domestic action with respect to the 90s levels. and additionally raise with actions abroad by additional 20% to a minus 50% target that was in the same level of magnitude as in the Europe as a peer. So that was clearly an act of raising the ambition to what 30% would mean domestically. Funnily, last year we had a vote on a more ambitious law that has been voted down by the Swiss population because it was clearly above the 30%. So just to tell you, the 30% is not just a figure, but it's also, if you look at it from the perspective of consequences for a population, what prices, what costs to bear, this requires a discussion, and population may be against too high. So the 30% also means like what is politically possible. So that was in 2016 or 15, Paris Agreement, and Switzerland knew that playing this card, raising ambition through measures abroad, needs decent piloting. So the Climate Cent Foundation, which is the precursor foundation of the KliK Foundation, was tasked by the Swiss administration to earmark 20 million for piloting concrete action, concrete ways how Switzerland can go about Article 6 engagement. And this ultimately led to basically two elements. First is piloting the bilateral agreement between a partner country and Switzerland, and second, a concrete pilot program, which both, of course, go together because the partner country wants to understand what is this cooperation about. And that led, ultimately, 2020, in the agreement with Peru, a bilateral agreement that has been ratified between the countries. So it's not an MOU, it's a treaty of states. And in 2021, we could have a purchase agreement made with Tukivasi, that's the pilot activity, with funding envelope of over 20 million going forward until 2030. I'll come to that later. So, try my luck. That was the direction. Ah, yeah. Now it was. So, I love this display. Sorry for that. It is basically the best way to explain how the Swiss approach works, and very important, the implementation agreement between the two countries, which is happening all in the public space. You see the public space. Sorry, I'm out of the picture. And below, that's the private, the private to private engagement. Important for the Swiss approach, it's this implementation agreement that sets basically between the two sovereigns minimum requirements, and we'll come to that later, and the modalities and the common understanding on what the cooperation complies with and consists in. And it also concretizes the rules that have been decided in Glasgow, but still are in some instances not really ground rules to be used, because they have to be very very generic, while the implementation agreement really talks between the sovereigns. How do we do corresponding adjustment? Not there are different ways to do it, but how. And then what's also very important, Switzerland, unlike the Japanese crediting mechanism, Switzerland leaves the operationalization in the legal system in the responsibility of the two countries. So they call it a local kitchen. This is what we have here. Sorry again for leaving the picture. The Federal Office of Environment, that basically is the lead institution on the policy measures in Switzerland with respect to the CO2. And Switzerland has, since 2008, and you shouldn't forget that, since 2008, this system in place of offset, the obligation of fuel importers to offset part of the transport-borne emissions. And this is very important because we're not starting, or Switzerland is not starting from scratch. They have already institutions and processes in place for domestic and have to adapt it, or had adopted it now, for international mitigation outcomes. The KliK Foundation as well is not Switzerland. It's a private entity, it's a regulee, it's regulated by the CO2 law, the CO2 Act, to compensate a prescribed fraction of the emissions that are released in Switzerland through driving cars, and is funded by the motor fuel importers of Switzerland that are ultimately the compliance subject. Then, I'm not leaving the picture now, on the left side you see, that's very important, EPA, that's the case of Ghana right now. EPA is the competent authority there, and they have as well to establish a piece of legislation that ultimately will be needed in the initial report to be handed into the UN anyways. But these are the ground rules, what templates to use to register a project in Ghana. This is work on the way. I think it passed the Congress, so it's really a question of months maybe that this is released. At least we know the draft. Now this is important because it's like an interface. In order to involve the private sector, you need to have the regulatory body to address with your request to register an activity that is bound for international transfer. And all the rest, what was you see below, that's the purchase agreement part, that's private to private. I mean, we can work with sovereign entities, but like with a purchase agreement, we typically work with project owner, private to private. Yeah, there's a lot of good things that come with it. Now, bilateral agreements, very briefly, are very, very important for Switzerland because it is the vector for Switzerland to ensure and safeguard what Switzerland is really dear in that collaboration. The issues with the CDM were mentioned, but with the bilateral agreement, there is really scope to ensure quality standards. And what's Switzerland very dear is environmental integrity and human rights and sustainable development. This is really enshrined in these bilateral agreements. Then also there is a procedure to transfer the ITMOs, which is missing in the Glasgow decision so far. And as I said, corresponding adjustment on the host country side, and of course events of default, meaning suspension and termination of the agreement if things go wrong. Very important, with the bilateral implementation agreements, there comes a bit, I must say, of capacity building support, but only for those countries that have an agreement in place. And of course, technical cooperation at the level of the legislation, how to structure the procedures to authorize an activity. Sovereign responsibility means this is sovereign turf. We are not involved as KliK, as a private organization. We are expected to bring about 20 to up to 40 million ITMOs or mitigation outcomes up until 2040. The reason why this is unclear is basically that the regulation in Switzerland is still not final until 2030, it's final until 2024. And there is like the 5 cents per liter as a safeguard for the population. We have been talking about cost of living and so on. That is cross-cutting the discussion on climate change. So maybe this will lead to a situation where not the whole amount of 40 million can be brought about, but there are other sources, voluntary market. However, voluntary market will not be accounted towards the Swiss NDC, so corresponding adjustment, I'm aware of the discussion in Finland. Corresponding adjustment refers not to Switzerland but to the host country. So the host country will do, according to the bilateral agreement, correspondingly adjust their emissions levels for the utmost transferred, even for voluntary uses. So that's quite cool, actually, for the voluntary market. But so far, no traction was recorded there. And if things fail, then the state budget or some other source has to be found. But that's up to the public discussion in Switzerland. But someone has to pay it, actually, of course. Now, we do have a portfolio of, right now, roughly 40 projects, some in development, some pre-selected, and some even under validation. Even there are no ground rules really set for validation, but at least in Switzerland, the ground rules stand. You have a cure tag. We have a process, and we do provide funding for first the development support, so getting the documentation ready, and the long-term financing. That will be the purchase agreements. Now, in terms of projects, so we just to showcase some. So that is the Tukivasi project mentioned in Peru. This is actually a program of programs in a way. So through competitive tendering, the project proponent is selecting a stove manufacturer that contractually commit to build a certain amount of stoves in a certain region with certain specified standards. And this also allows to ensure no overlap between the domestic staff support programs that exist in Peru, the FONCODES, and like the additional Article 6 ambition that is triggered through that program and financed by Switzerland or financed by KliK and accounted for by the Swiss government. So that's an example how, and this is really running. 1,000 stoves have been built in a pilot, 7,000 were commissioned this year and are being built now. The second program is a e-bus program in Thailand that is also starting or has started right now to implement or to operate, implement and operate buses in Thailand, which is another country with which Switzerland has a bilateral agreement. And there are more, like a program to foster solar rooftop and small-scale solar PV in Ghana. Then a biofuel program in Senegal, biogas program, that capitalizes also on fertilizer. We have energy efficiency fund in Morocco. And I think, a green credit line in Peru that is being developed to de-risk funding to green measures in the SME. So with that, I finish with a little bit over time, and thank you very much.
Okay, thank you so much, Mischa, for your presentation, and you've really shown what you tried to capture what Switzerland has been doing, really being ahead of the game, I think, in terms of piloting. So thank you for that. I know there was a lot of information there, and I think the slides will be distributed later on, so you'll get a chance to read at your leisure. Okay, so I guess we're just waiting now for Sandra Lindström, who's the Head of International Cooperation at the Swedish Energy Agency. Sandra, are you there? Hey, Sandra, are you there?
Hello, Ash. Yes, I'm here.
Please go ahead. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Good afternoon, all. My name is Sandra Lindström, and I'm the head of International Climate Cooperation at the Swedish Energy Agency. I would like to thank you, Nefco, for organizing this seminar, and thank you for inviting me to share Sweden's experience in working with the carbon market cooperation under the Paris Agreement. I have been at the Swedish Energy Agency since 2010, and before that, I worked at the World Bank, Nation Development Bank, with carbon finance and activities, and I've seen the development of the carbon market in the Kyoto Protocol. Article 6 is quite different from the flexible mechanism of the Kyoto Protocol, and I'm excited to see how this instrument can support transformative and ambitious investments by reducing and removing barriers and costs that can stand in the way of rapid transition. Sweden has been engaged in the development of the carbon market and carbon finance activities in the past 20 years and have supported over 100 carbon finance projects under the CDM of the Kyoto Protocol. And since 2018, we have been working with the development of Article 6 activities. And I'm happy to share the experiences that we have in this area, where we are at currently in our work, and also the challenges that we have faced and facing. But before that, I'll just say a few words about the Swedish Energy Agency and the mandate that we have with regards to Article 6 and carbon finance activities. So next slide, please. I can't see whether there's a next slide, but okay, thank you. So Swedish Energy Agency is a government agency responsible for energy policies and in particular supply and use of energy in Sweden. We have a quite broad mandate, but some of the things that we are responsible for is implementing and following up energy policies in Sweden, fund national research and renewable energy technologies. We have also a coordinating role in maintaining security of energy supply on a national level, and also we develop international climate programs under the Paris Agreement as part of Sweden's supplementary measures to fulfill our national climate target by 2030. And we are around 450 employees at the agency. And Swedish Energy Agency is responsible for the international climate cooperation related to carbon finance under the Kyoto Protocol and Paris Agreement. And also that includes the engagement with the World Bank, Asian Development Bank, and Global Green Growth Institute with regards to Article 6 and carbon finance. Next slide, please. So what is the rationale for Sweden to work with Article 6, and what is the mandate of the Swedish Energy with regards to Article 6? So this slide shows Sweden's energy and climate policy targets. One of the targets is no net emissions of greenhouse gases by 2045. And according to our climate target, at least 85% of the emission reductions will be done by domestic actions. And the remaining amount can be done by supplementary measures. And one of these supplementary measures is the international emission reductions through Article 6 of the Paris Agreement. Next slide, please. And Sweden's objective is to contribute to the fulfillment of our climate goal by 2030 and 2045. The objective is also to contribute to the development of Article 6 as a mechanism, as a way to raise ambition. And our third objective is to support low and middle income countries in overachieving their climate plans and in that way raising ambition. Next slide, please. So where are we today? We started developing Article 6 back in 2018 when no countries were ready to engage. And the reason was there were many uncertainties. We didn't have a rule book in place. we had quite little knowledge about what Article 6 is about. So many countries simply didn't know how this will work and wanted to wait until there were rules in place and more knowledge on how it will work. And therefore we started with what we called virtual pilots, where it was basically case studies in order to understand how it could work, how the challenges look like, in order to understand where we could start our work. And it has taken some time to develop Article 6 cooperation, but we are happy that we have come this far today in Sweden, where we have found 3 host countries that were willing to share this journey of translating the possibilities of Article 6 into reality. And today, so Sweden has signed a memorandum of understanding with Dominican Republic, Ghana, and Nepal. We signed our first MOU with Ghana at COP26. The MOU with Dominican Republic and Nepal was signed at the sidelines of the Stockholm Plus 50 meeting in June this year. And beside these 3 countries, Sweden is also supporting the development of Article 6 in Laos, Cote d'Ivoire through our engagement in Article 6 program led by Global Green Growth Institute. And we are also having some early dialogue with a couple of other countries to see how we could potentially develop a cooperation in the future. Next slide, please. So this is the transaction model that we use in Sweden. And basically, we have a bilateral agreement between the host country and the buyer country in order to establish the cooperation. And the bilateral agreement basically stipulates how the authorization or approval of mitigation activities will work, how the corresponding adjustment will work in order to avoid double claims, and also how the issuance and transfer will work. And in parallel, we sign a mitigation action purchase agreement with a project owner, which can be either private or public sector. And in the case of Sweden, Swedish Energy Agency is the one that signs both the bilateral agreement between the 2 countries and the purchase agreement that is signed between the buyer and the seller. Next slide, please. Our experience with developing the project pipeline in Sweden back in the CDM days under the Kyoto Protocol showed us that it was quite effective to work both bilaterally, to work both with a bilateral project portfolio that you are developing yourself, and also working closely with multilateral organization by participating in carbon funds. Why? And the reason is this is a way of diversifying risk. Having an engagement in the multilateral carbon funds enabled us to support. Excuse me, just 2 seconds. Apologize. We are saving energy here in Sweden, so I think that was the automatic light switch that kicked on. Okay, so having both multilateral and bilateral portfolio, gives us the possibility to diversify risk. Having an engagement in multilateral carbon funds enables us to support more countries, more programs compared to developing only a bilateral program ourselves. And having a bilateral program allows us to really understand Article 6 from the ground, which I hope enable us also to influence the rulemaking and the policy developments internationally. And therefore, we think it has been effective for us to engage both bilaterally and multilaterally. We are also developing Article 6 programs through our partner organization, Global Green Growth Institute, where GGGI is developing a number of programs and facilitating the discussions between Sweden and the host country that we are working with. Next slide, please. So where are we as of today? What is our focus in the remaining of 2022 and 2023? The next step for us after signing the Memorandum of Understanding is to have a bilateral agreement with the host country. And this is where we are with regards to all three countries, Ghana, Nepal, and Dominican Republic. We are also sourcing mitigation activities and projects in these three countries, and we hope to be able to sign our first purchase agreement by the first half of next year. We are currently working on developing Sweden's national framework for Article 6, and the framework will basically describe the institutional arrangement with regards to the authorization, the corresponding adjustment, and hopefully we will also be able to submit a proposal to a government by mid next year on this area. With regards to capacity building is really important in order to ease for countries to participate in Article 6. And this is why we have partnered with some of our partner organization in order to support host countries to develop Article 6 program and to facilitate the process for the bilateral agreements, as I mentioned previously as well. And even though Article 6 rulebook from Glasgow is in place, there's still a lot of unknowns related to methodology and other technical details. And therefore, we are also continuing to work and analyzing a number of different Article 6 methodology components. Next slide, please. Our experiences so far. So it's been quite challenging to build a pipeline. And sometimes I wonder how come it is so challenging, because there are unlimited amount of mitigation actions that needs to be done out there. And there's a lot of investors with private equity that are waiting for the perfect investment. So how come is it so challenging? And I think part of the reason is that many project developers are not yet aware of Article 6 as a financial instrument that can support mitigation actions or climate projects. Another reason is that there's still a lot of unknowns. We have, as I mentioned previously, we have the rulebook from Glasgow, but there are still a lot of questions to be answered in order to ensure that the emission reductions can be Article 6 compliant. So I think there's some hesitation still from many project owners to engage in Article 6, but I hope that this will change in the near future. Extensive capacity building and knowledge sharing is really needed. Since Article 6 is a new instrument that has not been done before, there are lots of unknowns, as I mentioned, and we cannot wait for all the detailed rules to be developed, as it really would just take a lot of time. Therefore, we need to find solutions to those questions that we face in order to move forward with our work. And I think this can be done if we can do it together. And also, lastly, I'd like to also to say that the need to increase focus on no harm and safeguarding. I think that carbon market can play a vital role in raising climate ambition, but in order to do so, the market and the public needs to trust the Article 6 that it can deliver real emission reductions that are additional and contribute to sustainable development. And lastly, host country dialogue is key. That basically goes without saying, but just want to underline that the importance of the relationship between the two countries in order to have a smooth process in developing Article 6. Next slide, please. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sandra. I hope you could hear the applause.
I could hear. Thank you so much.
Good. There was lots there. Okay, thank you so much. I think you gave a really good overview of what Sweden is taking forwards. And again, it's great for the audience here and for stakeholders in Finland to know that experience is out there. And we're very pleased, of course, that we can share some of that with you in the NICA group as well. So thank you so much. And thank you all also for your patience. We have one more presentation, and that's from Hugh Salway at the Gold Standard Foundation. And Hugh, I'll pass over to you shortly. And for the audience here and online, please pull together your questions, your thoughts, and we'll try and address some of those before the next session. So please, Hugh, are you online? Yep, he's there, I think. Hi, Hugh. The floor is yours.
Hi everyone. My name is Hugh Salway. I am Head of Markets at Gold Standard, and it's a real pleasure to be here with all of you today and to have heard from the other speakers before me. For those of you who don't know Gold Standard, we are a certification standard which has served the carbon market for nearly 20 years now. We have around 2,000 projects registered with Gold Standard across the world, mostly in the Global South, almost exclusively. And in the past, we've typically served the voluntary carbon market, so voluntary users of carbon credits, those wishing to make carbon neutrality targets or targets which are similar to those. But I'm here today to talk a little bit about the work which we're doing in the new context under the Paris Agreement with the implementation of Article 6. And if we could go to my first slide, please. And on, please. In the past, and still kind of now amongst many, there is kind of a distinguishment made in the carbon market between voluntary carbon markets and compliance carbon markets. So the use of carbon credits for voluntary purposes by companies or individuals, and then compliance purposes, so use towards national targets. And one of the things that I think is very important that we have seen with the implementation of Article 6 is essentially a new distinction which is made in the carbon market between carbon credits which or mitigation outcomes which exist outside of Article 6, which have nothing to do with Article 6 of the Paris Agreement, and then those which are explicitly authorized under Article 6 by the host country. And it isn't so clear as it was in the past to make the distinction between voluntary and compliance use because, and I think we heard a little bit about this earlier, some carbon credits which are authorized under Article 6 may be used in the voluntary carbon market. So there may be companies which wish to buy carbon credits which have corresponding adjustments in the future. And we as a standard are very familiar with the bottom yellow section of what you see on the slide here now. We're very familiar with carbon credits which exist outside of an international framework like Article 6. In some cases, those are used towards the voluntary carbon market. In other cases, our carbon credits are eligible under local carbon taxes like Colombia and South Africa. But like the governments who we've heard from before, we in Gold Standard are now having to think about how we support and enable carbon market activities which are run under Article 6. We're expecting in the future to have some of our projects receiving authorizations under Article 6. And we're expecting to issue units to those project developers, which will have corresponding adjustments. Some of those may be used towards countries' targets, some of those may be used in the voluntary carbon market, and some of those may be used under CORSIA, which is the International Aviation's Offsetting Scheme. And I just wanted to talk over the next few slides about some of the practical steps that we're taking within Gold Standard to support the development of Article 6 from the perspective of a standard. So if we can move on to the next slide, please. So on this slide, and it's probably quite hard for you to see in the room, but I just wanted to show a snapshot of some of the different elements that we're doing. So on the left-hand side here, one of the things that we introduced around the start of this year was new requirements within our standard for credits which are authorized under Article 6 of the Paris Agreement. So if a host country has issued a letter of authorization, which we've heard a little bit about before, we now have requirements in place within our standard which explain what we will need to see within that letter of authorization in order to be able to list that properly on our registry, how we will manage those credits in terms of how they're reflected on the registry, and what we'll do in cases where the host country doesn't actually apply a corresponding adjustment that it has committed to apply. So that's one of the first steps that we took earlier this year. And I think we're the first example of a standard in the world which has these requirements in place for all possible applications of Article 6, so for the voluntary carbon market, for CORSIA, and for use towards national targets. The second step which we've done, which you can see on the top right of this slide, is we've introduced new functionality into our registry to allow us to show which credits have been authorised for use under Article 6 by host countries and which credits have had a corresponding adjustment applied. So as we are now, there are no credits kind of across the world which have this authorisation in place and have had a corresponding adjustment applied. But in the future, within our registry, you will be able to see units which are kind of run under Article 6 and have adjustments and those which don't. And that will really kind of enable transparency on the standard level as the market develops in the future. Going back to the slide on the bottom left, we ran a very interesting and important process over the first half of this year to look at what changes are required within our standard, so to our requirements, to our methodologies, in order to be consistent with what Article 6 tells us is needed for carbon market activities, but also what is needed in this new context under the Paris Agreement, where we have an mission to get to net zero emissions by the midpoint of the century, and where business as usual is no longer sufficient. So we ran a process through the first half of this year involving experts from the negotiations, from consultancy, including Hanna-Mari, and from other fields as well, to help us to really work through where we need to update our requirements in order to reflect what's required for the carbon market in the future. And these kind of recommendations which came from this group will be implemented into our standard over the months ahead. And then the final step that we've done, which you definitely won't be able to see in the room, is on the bottom right-hand corner. And this is that we've started to build up relationships and partnerships with certain governments in order to play that enabling role of us as a standard, helping governments to use Article 6 in an effective way. So there is work which we are doing with the Swedish Energy Agency and with support from the Swedish Energy Agency to build up the functionality for a standard like ours to be used for Article 6. There's also an MOU which we've signed with the government of Singapore, which will allow credits from gold standard to be used by Singaporean companies under their carbon tax, and for those credits to be counted towards the Singaporean national target. Onto the next slide, please. Alongside the steps which we're doing to improve and kind of update our own standard are steps that we're doing to build capacity across the market. And a lot of capacity building efforts so far and kind of going on are rightly focused on governments. So how do we build the capacity of governments to be able to use Article 6 well? And that's incredibly important, but also important is work to support the private sector. So those project developers and other actors who will be designing projects for the issuance of mitigation outcomes under Article 6, but then also other market actors as well who will play a role. And there's some work which we've been doing over the first half of this year and will continue to do to support this capacity. So we've been running a webinar series to build understanding across our market stakeholders of what Article 6 means in practice and how to understand some of the key issues. There is a piloting initiative which we are doing with 3 of our project developers, where Perspectives Climate Group is providing support for them to really understand how to go about the process of seeking an authorization from a host country, how to design a project which is aligned with Article 6, and then also is helping to bring together the host country and the project developer to support an Article 6 authorization. Alongside this, on the right-hand side, we've supported the setup of a platform where project developers are able to come together to share early experiences of trying to develop projects under Article 6, and so they can build understanding in general of this. And I think the act of putting this out there was a real sign of how much something like this is needed. So we put out an advert for this new platform, and within a couple of weeks, we had 100 project developers who had signed up to take part in this. So there's huge interest clearly in understanding what Article 6 means for project developers and how this can affect their development in the future. And then the final piece which we're doing is supporting the government of Uganda to understand and to work through how it is that they want to use Article 6 and what are the decisions that they want to take to inform their Article 6 framework within the government. On to the next slide, please. And the final thing which I wanted to reflect on here is the work that we're trying to do to promote higher ambition and to promote integrity under Article 6. So when Gold Standard was founded in the first place, it was by WWF and other NGOs with a mission to try to raise the bar for carbon market activities. And that's a mission which we as a standard are really trying to take forward now we move into this new context under Article 6. And there are several pieces of work that we've done over the first half of this year to really try to support this mission. So firstly, we introduced a set of updated claims guidelines for our stakeholders and users of Gold Standard earlier this year, which provided updated guidance on how to offset with integrity and how to use the carbon market with integrity in the new context of the Paris Agreement. And that dealt with some of the issues which some of you may be familiar with around double counting with NDCs and the risk of displacement. The second step that we're doing is updating and modifying an SDG tool that we've had in place for a little bit of time. And this is a tool to help project developers to accurately monitor the impacts which their projects are having to positively support sustainable development in the country. And we're doing some work with that tool now to allow it to be used by governments as well as by project developers and to really allow projects to understand and to reflect and to explain how they are supporting sustainable development in the host country through Article 6 activities. And this is a piece of work that I hope will really help to support the kind of second goal, which is really there under Article 6, which is the promotion of sustainable development. Mitigation outcomes is one part, but sustainable development is another part of positive, ambitious Article 6 activities. And then the final piece of work that we've done over this year so far is a piece of work funded by the Swiss government to look at what are the good practice principles and approaches for designing and working with activities under Article 6.2 of the Paris Agreement. So in here we looked at some of the important issues for environmental integrity, like additionality, permanence, baseline setting. But we also looked at some of the points which Sandra talked about earlier as well, like sustainable development and safeguards and the principle of doing no harm. And these are pieces of work that we hope to build on through our own work over the next few years as well. And I have another slide where I wanted to kind of reflect on some of the key lessons so far, but they were actually very well covered in Sandra's presentation earlier. I think we have some very similar lessons from work so far. And so I think I'm going to stop there so that there's enough time for questions. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Hugh, for that. And I really got a sense of déjà vu there, Hugh, just listening to your words, because it was 20 years ago when I worked with a project for Mark Kember, who was one of your predecessors a long time ago, where we looked at developing a sustainable development manual and a screening tool for the emerging CDM market at the time. So I was very pleased to be at the first technical advisory board meeting of the Gold Standard 20 years ago. Okay, that makes me feel old. Right. Okay. So, but thank you, Hugh. You gave a great presentation there. I think in terms of highlighting this issue around the need for having Paris-aligned credits. I think maybe to bring some order also to the voluntary market. And I think there's quite a lot of concerns around the integrity of that, and is this really driving the climate impacts that we want? And also highlighting this need for having a sort of a sovereign and private sector interface as well. And at Nika also we've been working with the government of Uganda, or at least looking to work with them. We've developed a couple of concepts that we'd like to take forward with them, which hopefully we can take forward for piloting. But thank you for that, and thank you all for your patience. We've been listening to some very interesting presentations and some early lessons learnt from colleagues from Sweden and Switzerland, and from experts active in this in this area. So, if anyone has any questions that you'd like to raise, I can see some hands already. Please direct them to whomever you want to, and I think we can also take questions online as well. Yeah, I think Karia's got one online, but maybe we can have the first question already.
My name is this working? Yes. My name is Jukka Osukainen. I'm from the Prime Minister's Office of Finland. Yes, indeed, like Minister Haavisto said, I have been there long time, 20 COPs or Conference of the Parties. And I remember one particularly was in Copenhagen where Hillary Clinton came and asked us to promise 100 billion, mobilizing $100 billion for developing countries. Most of that promise was for the private sector to bring in. That I remember because I was with my president and my prime minister there, and we were discussing how on earth we can raise public funding, grant financing for this. That's why this is so important, this discussion. We didn't deliver. Even today, we are short of at least 20 billion or 30 billion. And much of that is concessional loans, even what we promised. So in that sense, we are there now. I have questions, difficult questions to all of you. One difficult question to Hanna-Mari is that as we have now Article 6 rules done, as we need government's interventions, I mean good governments, Nordic government's intervention, why we have moratorium in EU that we can't enter into a state offset markets until 2030, and why Finnish government is also not in that one. Maybe your expert view on this political issue. For my colleague from KliK Foundation, I understand that you have a special fund. You draw the tax from the fuel, and then you have special fund, and you purchase offset from developing countries. We can't do it in EU, but you can do it. That's a great accomplishment. Now, how costly they are? Are you taking the most highest quality offset? Are you not, or are you reaping the lowest hanging fruits? I'm a bit kind of provocating here. And so how do you guarantee the quality, and what comes to the price of that kind of offsets? And then to my colleague from Sweden, as you have entered already into the business of offset markets, how do you justify that ITMOs crediting for your government? Are they the excess level which you are aiming at with your carbon neutrality target vis-à-vis the EU level which you have actually agreed for 2030? So where is your leverage and how much potential you have between those? Thank you.
Great questions. I think we will take a couple more, and then if you can answer that. I think it's a tough question for Hanna-Mari. I think good questions all around. So maybe, Kari, do you want to give the online question? Yeah? And to whom it's directed?
Yes, thank you. To Sandra, same as Mr. Osukainen was asking, how Sweden is actually using this ITMOs, as there's an EU target where you cannot use ITMOs. That's for Sandra. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. And I think the gentleman here.
Okay, thank you. I'm Mikael Hildén from the Finnish Environment Institute. This is a question directed to several of the speakers who referred to robust rules. And my question is really, how do you see that? Because there is, of course, a trade-off between robustness, redundancy, and heaviness. And so it may, in the end, the most robust rules may turn out to be impossible to implement because it excludes everyone by neglecting or trying to get to zero risk, which is impossible. So how is this balance between robustness and then workable rules dealt with? Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I think maybe if we try and take those questions, and we'll see if we have time for more I suspect not, but if we can have brief answers, please. Hanna-Mari, I guess.
This in my head. Thank you for that question. I think, and I've lived through the first golden age of carbon markets and the complete crash, and now the second coming or third, or I lost count. So I would say that at some point there was a lack of ambition and there was a lack of need for international cooperation. It is very much to do with ambition. And that meant that in the EU context there wasn't necessarily a need for credits because there was already over-allocation anyway. At the same time in the negotiations there was a real need to get developing countries to take on targets. And so there is a political history, and I'm sure Jukka, you know that more than perfectly. And now we are focusing on having that ambition first and foremost at home. So we're at that first step of the mitigation hierarchy, because you always have to do things at home enough, and only then can you use carbon market cooperation to do more. But to believe that carbon markets can be used to do more requires trust, and I think there is a crisis of trust for the carbon markets at the moment. And it's so easy to lose the trust, and it's very, very hard to get it back. And I think that's one piece of the puzzle, but I would really hope that we can start to restore the trust and show that you can use carbon markets in addition to the targets, not to use them towards the targets, but to raise ambition, because we still need to raise ambition. We're far from the 1.5 degree pathway anyway. But yeah, I think trust is really important, and maybe I'll pick up on the robust rules as well. That's why the robust rules are so important. If you don't strike a balance that restores trust, we don't have the markets. We've basically seen that happen already. But I fully agree that perfection can't be the same thing as robust rules. So hopefully we don't lose trust if we can't be perfect all the time. And this has been a balance that we've been trying to strike for 20 years. And I'm sure I'll die before we strike that balance to everybody's satisfaction. But I guess we can always live trying anyway.
Okay, thank you. And I think that's a good point. Thanks. It's a trade-off. I guess no one will ever be happy with the trade-off. Mischa, your response.
Difficult. I mean, the question is not difficult, but I would start with you where you ended the trust part. I think from the perspective of Switzerland, of how the KliK Foundation works, we're not into a secondary market. Maybe not yet, but this is not currently the intention. Also not from the perspective of these bilateral agreements. It's really about cooperation. And there is one simple reason why we are not after the low-hanging fruits, because these would eventually or certainly create frictions at the moment when a host country would need to transfer them. We are not buying already issued or created mitigation outcomes, but we are basically contracting them in advance in order to enable the project to go ahead. So at the moment, when a host country realizes that they are just giving away their silver for free, they would oppose, I would expect. So what we are looking are those sweet spots that do not compete with domestic action and possibilities, and basically from a very pragmatic perspective, in order to avoid conflicts going forward. And it's really about trust, creating trust with the host country, because there will be a lot of discussions around what authorization means for an activity or a program. For example, how will this program fit into a funding landscape for solar PV in Ghana? Because there are several EU-funded programs around that might be deficient or not, but it somehow has to fit into an overall picture. And this is the responsibility of the host country to make sure that this flies, and also that they are not taking on a negative position by authorizing that. And this is what's new. in the Paris world as compared to the Kyoto world. I wouldn't say it's complicated. It's just about more discussions to really get to a point where both parties can trust themselves. And the other point on the robustness and pricing, I mean, there is also a trade-off with inclusivity. Certain activities or technologies we're just not going into. Also, questions around fossil fuel lock-in. We're not going into that, and this also means that specific technologies like the switch from heavy fuel oil to natural gas will not be supported by Article 6. And it is basically generously left to the host countries to tackle with that. And my personal fear is a little bit that we end up with a picture of a tree where the low-hanging fruits are scarcely picked, and the high-hanging fruits are scarcely picked, and the low-hanging fruits are fallen to the ground and left to be rotten. And that's a bit my personal fear.
Okay, thank you. And maybe Sandra, you can comment on this. I'm being asked to move ahead, and thanking Dirk for his patience as well. But Sandra, do you have any responses to those good questions?
Yeah, thank you for the questions. I think I received 2 questions with regards to the use of ITMO towards Sweden's national target. So it is right that we won't be able to use the ITMO towards our EU target, or the Swedish climate target in the EU. And the purchase of ITMO is really towards Sweden's national climate goal, which is beyond the EU target. So I'll keep it really short, so that perhaps, I don't know, then perhaps you can also respond to some of the questions that we received. But that was the short answer.
I think we're going to have to draw a line under that part of the presentation. I'd like to thank the speakers once more, and if we can thank them in the time-honored fashion. Thank you so much. Okay, so I guess now we will move to our keynote speaker. So last but by no means least, we're privileged to have Dirk Forrester, a veteran practitioner and passionate advocate of the carbon market, and of course he's the president of the International Emissions Trading Association. So he should be a passionate ambassador for the organization. But I think, Dirk, you can speak now really around the sort of industry-led view. And you have a great membership there. Perhaps you can just take us through your message about Article 6. So please, Dirk.
Hi, Ash, and wow, it's great to see so many friends there. I'm having the FOMO moment of fear of missing out with you guys being there together, but I'm delighted that I can join this way and give you a perspective of how at least a large segment of the business community is viewing the future of carbon markets under Article 6 as a way of achieving Paris goals. Let's go to the next slide. I'll give you a little sense of, are my slides up? There we go. A little bit of a sense of how IETA is looking at this. Let's go to the next slide. IETA is as Ash said, a business association. I can't get all of the logos on one slide anymore, so this is a sampling of the 260 plus members of IETA. We've been growing dramatically as companies start to take on the net zero challenge that's sort of embedded in the Paris Climate Agreement. You won't find those words in the Paris Climate Agreement because it talks about reaching balance of sources and sinks, and talks about doing that in a way that can achieve a level of protection that is well below 2 degrees and hopefully as low as 1.5 degrees. So it's a massive undertaking, and one that increasingly businesses are picking up their piece of it. It's a mix of mandatory and compliant, which we call compliance markets, and voluntary markets. And I'm going to talk a little bit about how we're seeing the evolution of markets under the Paris Agreement. Let's go to the next slide. I should, as we're moving, mention there are some of my members that are there in the room, I'm sure. So I hope I represent you faithfully here. I want to talk a little bit about fundamentally how do we get to net zero goals, and that brings us to the fundamentals. Fundamentals including sort of what Article 6 is truly about. And I think increasingly we're seeing it as being the net of net zero. The Paris Agreement doesn't say just zero. It says get there with a balance of sources and sinks. So let's talk a bit about what the net of net zero is. Fundamentally, it's achieving that goal of the balance that's there, but at a really aggressive level. Let's go to the next slide. And in the run-up to Paris, which Hanna-Mari and Mischa and others there were involved in, and Ash, of course, we saw this emergence of countries expressing their tentative interest in use of Article 6 type mechanisms. This was before there was an Article 6, and countries were putting their NDCs together and submitting them in advance of the Paris Agreement. You'll notice that the dark blue are the countries that made no mention of use of markets, and that included the US and the EU. Now, mind you, strictly speaking, the EU is using markets. It's the main tool that's being used in Europe. But this was about whether it would open its borders to international cooperation, and it didn't specifically mention that. But all of the countries in green, or the hashed green, are countries that were expressing some interest in potential use of that instrument. It was over half of the countries working in the Paris negotiations. So where have we gotten to? We now are in a period of getting enhanced NDCs put on the table. Let's go to the next slide. This is something we're also trying to track at AIDA, and it's a more varied picture. But right now, it looks like there are a whole lot more countries, more like 80+% of the countries that are either going to be dependent on use of Article 6 or have strong interest in using it, or are already engaged in pilots like Switzerland through the KliK Foundation. You'll notice Sweden is also there as one of the countries, in Germany, that's sort of exploring ways that Article 6 might address some of the emissions from sectors that are not in the EU ETS, because of course the EU ETS is closed to international cooperation outside of Europe. So the interest level is much higher than we've ever seen it before. And I think part of the reason why is that this concept of just how aggressive the targets have to be for reaching Paris temperature goals, how aggressive those are, and how you're at the end of the day better off working with others. Let's go to the next slide. So Article 6 can be seen as the net of net zero, but it's also the one place in the Paris Agreement that talks mostly about the private finance being channeled to places where it can achieve mitigation potential. And market cooperation gives a set of incentives for cooperation between businesses across national borders. So it's a way of achieving better efficiencies as a group than we could achieve individually. So let's go to the next slide. I want to give you a little bit of a sense of what we've been learning through economic models in terms of how the efficiency of Article 6 can enable ambition. And I think Hanna-Mari touched on this point a few minutes ago. At the end of the day, it's a tool for delivering more ambition. This spaghetti chart that you see on the right is a representation of the first round of NDCs that countries put together. This is done on a regional basis using the GCAM model. And for those of you that are familiar with models, you'll know this is one that is developed by one of the U.S. National Energy Labs, the Pacific Northwest National Lab. When I was in government in the Clinton administration, we used this model. It's been used in every IPCC report since the first one. So it's a tool that many have relied on that can look at sort of on a global basis what the efficiencies of cooperation can deliver. What we did with this was to map out what individual implementation would look at. That's the spaghetti that you see there. This was the first round of commitments, so this wasn't giving you near a 2-degree level even. This was more like 2.5, 2.7 degrees, but we still learned some lessons. One of the main lessons is that if you allowed everyone to cooperate and you actually assumed perfect implementation, which we know we want to achieve, you would get a cost curve that looks more like that dark red line in the middle. It makes sense, right? It's an average. It brings the high cost ones down in line with the lower ones. And you can see the actual pricing dynamics in the boxes on the left-hand side. So it brings the cost parameters more like, it basically cuts in half the overall compliance cost. We also asked what would happen if you reinvested the savings in additional mitigation, which is part of the idea, is that you embolden countries to take on stronger commitments. And what we found was that if you reinvested it, you could achieve nearly double the ambition of the original NDCs. So it's really a power tool, this Article 6 thing. It's got the potential for delivering more ambition, but the other really critical lesson of this modeling series was that every country is better off through cooperation than they are acting alone. Whether you're a seller and you're attracting more revenue, or if you're a buyer and you're investing in another place at a lower cost, everyone ended up better off. And I'm talking in GDP terms, because at the end of the day, in 2100, these numbers are getting up to serious numbers. We've been continuing this research, aligning it to the new NDCs that are put on the table. We'll be sharing more of that at COP27 in Sharm el-Sheikh. But the basic storyline still holds true. It's just that as the ambition increases, as you'd expect, the cost levels go up substantially. Let's move on to the next slide. And by the way, in passing, I want to thank the government of Sweden, because I think Sweden and Norway, Germany have all been supporters of this research, along with some of my member companies, and we really have benefited from that support. So the next slide gives you a kind of a drop back to, so where are we today? And this is a chart from ICAP that shows the current carbon markets and what performance has been over the course of time. And you'll notice on the right-hand side what you feel dramatically there in Finland, with the EU ETS prices rising in response to tightening targets, to the war in Ukraine, to changes in energy markets. And we're seeing pricing levels that we didn't expect to see for another 10 or 15 years, but they're upon us now. This is up in the EU ETS is trading in the 70 to 90 range these days in response to all of those factors. And I'm not going to actually dwell on this side on the right where it talks about the differences in allowances and credits, because I think looking at the prior panel, I think you've got a good sense of that. The core market is a part of a broader carbon pricing system around the world that has delivered something on the order of 80 billion, I think it's 84 billion last year. The voluntary markets that's getting a huge amount of attention was only 2 billion last year, and that was its highest year ever. So the real money is in the compliance markets, which are those markets that are pricing carbon on a daily basis, that have forward curves that business can plan against, and that are generating tremendous amounts of climate finance that governments can reinvest if they choose in their own domestic mitigation, or some of them are using that for international support. So the markets are continuing to grow, and we would expect them to accelerate their growth as tighter targets such as Fit for 55 kind of come into force. Let's move to the next slide. Now I want to talk about the voluntary markets in particular, sometimes called carbon offsets or carbon credits. I know got some attention earlier in this session. This is one type of instrument that can be traded in Article 6, but you could also see allowance markets link up and see trades of allowances between jurisdictions. This market has really accelerated in the last 2 years, and I think this is mainly driven by corporates that are looking at what it means to take a net zero goal. What does it mean to aggressively decarbonize your own internal system, and then still need to do additional mitigation where you turn to the international offset market? It's still just a fraction of what the market for allowances is in Europe, for example, but it could be important for jurisdictions that don't have national pricing programs, notably the US, because a lot of this is growth is driven by US corporates that are ready to take on a more aggressive stance in addressing climate change than their federal government is, or else they're being prompted by states and localities to undertake additional mitigation. So that's a bit of a state of the market. Let's keep moving. Next slide, please. We've also seen a plethora of credit types coming to the fore. And this is a rather changing picture, but Ecosystem Marketplace, which provided the data from the prior slide, good friends of ours, they've cataloged 170 different types of carbon credits. And really, I think this is a sign of the innovation that markets can bring in identifying sort of new approaches to mitigation. And it's an ever-changing picture, partly because some of these activities become part of a business as usual scenario, so they're no longer eligible for creating carbon credits. But they're also innovations in the types. I'd say blue carbon is one where we're talking about sort of carbon sequestered in marine systems that's come along relatively recently. And I expect we'll see a lot more on the carbon capture and storage or direct air capture front as we move up the cost curve. The other big factor is that for some of the low-cost ones, they're being drawn into national implementation plans. So if it's being used by a country for meeting its own target, then again, it's no longer eligible for export. So it would not be it might be tracked in a different type of a carbon credit, but not an ITMO. But this gives you some flavor for what a variety and how much innovation has occurred already. When I started this issue, we had like 7 types, right, back in the late 90s. But now we're up to 170, which is really impressive. Next slide, please. I do want to talk a little bit about some of the efforts underway in the voluntary carbon market for driving more integrity. There's been a lot of public interest in whether the pledges made by companies are real, and whether the types of emission credits that they're relying on for that extra bit of mitigation is actually has high veracity or not. So in the past 2 years, been a couple of major initiatives that have come along that I think are important to be aware of. And you may have already talked about them briefly, but one is the Integrity Count of the Voluntary Carbon Market, which AIDA is involved in as part of the Secretariat team. This initiative was launched a couple of years ago originally as a task force, but has now become a new institution that aims to set a threshold standard for integrity that that can cut across all of the crediting standards, be they governmental or voluntary market standards, so that you can kind of separate the wheat from the chaff, that you can know what the best of the best is. This is a process that is currently underway. That we're hoping the task force will make it, or I'm sorry, the Integrity Council will make its initial findings of sort of what represents integrity in terms of core carbon principles. That's due this year. We're hoping that we'll get the initial outlines of that. Right now, we've just come off of a public comment period where there's been substantial engagement. I think 6,000 comments have been filed, something like that. And now the expert panel and some of the board members on the Standard Oversight Committee are working their way through the comments to try to land on a package of recommendations for this threshold standard that they can then be employed across the existing standards to highlight what is the best of the best. This process, I think, holds great potential in part because it's married up with another initiative called the Voluntary Carbon Market Integrity Initiative that is many of the same letters, but the idea of it is to focus more on the demand side and how countries might utilize, or companies might utilize or claim credit for various things that are types of credits that are utilized. So I think you'll hear more about both of those initiatives over the next few months. And the idea is that it represents a bit of a reset of voluntary markets with some new tools that can hopefully encourage investors to come in an even bigger way so that we can grow the voluntary side to catch up a bit with where the compliance side of the market has grown. Let's move on then. I know you've been listening to me for a while, so I just want to talk a little bit about how the net of net zero can also encourage innovation and cooperation between public and private sectors, but also across sectors. One of the underlying drivers, of course, in all of this is that the costs of mitigation differ across countries. Not everybody's blessed with the same amount of mitigation potential at an affordable cost as others. So that next ton is going to cost a whole lot more in the modernized jurisdictions than those that are still behind us on the development curve. That's partly just a feature of the age of infrastructure and how new and efficient the infrastructure is. But increasingly, I think in the carbon market space, there's a recognition that it's really about your removal potential. And not every country has great access to underground storage potential. Not every country has large landmass for dealing with agriculture or forests. So we're going to need a system that can bring together those that have removal potential with those who don't, or who have very expensive removal potential. That's part of what Article 6 can be about in terms of the innovation side of things. Let's move forward to the next slide. I think one of the ways that this is being looked at is in the crediting standards. This is a set of, by and large, on the left, have grown up as serving volunteers, but increase these removal approaches. I'm sure Hugh, my friend Hugh Solway, talked about this a bit, about gold standards work. If not, you should chase him on it. But Gold Standard, Vera, American Carbon Registry are all working on these at a time that governments are exploring how they will set up new standards for those crediting approaches. We're involved at AIDA in I guess it's been about an 18-month process with the government of Japan to try to look at how to harmonize the elements of crediting for for carbon capture, storage, and other types of removals, so that we can encourage harmonization across both government and compliance systems. But there's another piece of innovation that I don't think many of us saw coming, say, 15 years ago in the carbon market space, and that is that governments might begin to recognize the actual standards that are developed in the voluntary market. So in fact, you have the potential for a convergence of these two types of markets. Corsia is probably the best example of that, or the state of California and Quebec, where they have recognized some of the independent standards as a part of their system design. But I think this holds great potential because in the past we've seen a lot of innovation in the voluntary market side that helps build good practices that can then be brought into the big leagues of the compliance markets. So when you think Article 6, think also about these forms of innovation, whether they actually be the technologies underlying the emission or that are providing the emission mitigation, or the standards that are being set to measure, verify, and accredit them. Let's move to the next slide, because I know I'm running out of time and I want to leave a little bit of time for discussion. I want to close with one other bit of innovation that I think is coming at our market that will be, I think, a very beneficial thing. It'll be one that hopefully adds transparency and veracity to the markets overall. And it's growing out of the Climate Warehouse program that the World Bank has led for the past few years. And I know that Hugh and Mischa and others have had some involvement with this Climate Warehouse program. IETA has conducted a set of consultations between the Climate Warehouse team and the private sector to try to identify what some of the stumbling blocks were for getting increased investment through markets into mitigation in developing countries. And amongst the set of challenges that we identified was the ability to get registries to link together. It's brought us into a world of the potential of using digitized registries that could connect in a highly secure way, but also a way that enables buyers and sellers to look at credits that are in the ecosystem and have a way to understand everything, all of the attributes in that credit, because they're digitized and easily sortable and visible. This has led us to consider the launch of a new initiative that we'll be talking about in the next few weeks, that the government of Singapore, that's what the NCCS is there on the bottom, the National Climate Change Secretariat of the government of Singapore. They've been championing this as a way of bringing together public and private entities, so entities like the Gold Standard and Verra, but also the national governments that are interested in this space to agree on the data specifications for these digital registries of the future. This has taken me way back earlier in my career. One of the first, when I left government, one of the first projects that I worked on in my prior job at NatSource was to do this for the UK government, to develop a set of specifications for the first registry for the UK ETS back way before there was an EU ETS. Then we kind of built on those specifications for a similar project, I think, for in France for an EU-wide approach. But it does come back to a really important set of data choices and sort of the descriptors of exactly what you want in your description of a credit, and you want to have trackable and traceable in the system. Not all of the stuff happening in digital markets is positive. We've seen some things that have alarmed folks in terms of the tokenization movement. But at the same time, there are a lot of features of digitization that will improve the accuracy, the speed, and the transparency of the registry systems of the future. So the hope is that if we get the standards agreed, this data of the data layer, that it will be something that all of the independent standards and countries can use that enable them to dock together and essentially enable transfers of units across a digital ecosystem. And I'm really excited about this project. Again, you'll be hearing more about it, but it will be a new entity launched that will undertake this work of setting the data standard. We're not going to run the metadata process itself. It's just establishing the standards so that everyone can go forth and multiply. So let's go to I think I've got one more slide maybe here to close it out. And I just want to give you a recap of, again, back to the fundamentals of what Article 6 is about. And I think most of the people in the room know this, right? But it is just a tool for cooperation, and you don't have to use it. But one of the lessons that I think we're experiencing across energy markets right now in response to the war and frankly, broader global economic fundamentals is that you can't achieve these types of goals, these massive transformations alone. I was at a big energy conference in Houston earlier this year, and I was really impressed with the two messages there. One was these energy executives that in the wake of the Ukraine war and all this happening, all the tumult in energy markets, none of them were backing away from their net zero aspirations. They were talking about how do you contend with a war, but also think about the hydrogen economy or direct air capture and major investments in natural climate solutions. The other big message that they had was none of us can get to net zero alone. We have to work together somehow. We have to create a commercial arrangement. And that's really what the Article 6 markets are about. And I think this isn't true just for companies. This is true for countries. You can try to go it alone, and there are a few countries, Brazil, for example, that's blessed with enormous natural climate solutions. But economically, it will be worse off if it doesn't participate in Article 6. We've recently done a set of runs on in our Article 6 modeling of what happens to Russia if nobody wants to cooperate with them. There's a massive amount of mitigation potential in Russia with the large landmass. And what happens is if Russia backs away and is isolated Russia gets none of this investment. Russia loses out to the tune of something like $750 to $800 billion over the course of the century. Everybody else takes a little hit, but everybody else, if they cooperate, actually come out fine. There are a few countries that come out better off. But it kind of illustrates the importance of coming together in this biggest challenge of our lifetimes. And that's what Article 6 is about. And if we can breathe life in it together, public, private, it really offers the greatest hope of achieving the Paris climate goals. Without it, you just should plan on 2 degrees or better, because it will be economically impossible to get as low as we need to go. So I hope it sort of reinvigorates your reason for being at this meeting today, is that what you're doing is really noble work, because it's the connective tissue of the Paris Agreement that's going to enable us to make it work or not. So hopefully we can redouble our efforts in this coming decade to really make it work. Thank you very much.
Okay, Dirk, thank you so much for your presentation. I think you have invigorated us. I think I think you've captured a number of these issues. The fact that we need to engage with the private sector, there needs to be this sense of partnership. I think we've had the themes running through this this presentation, or this afternoon rather. I'm hopeful that there are some questions here. I can see one hand already, but maybe if I could use the speaker's prerogative and just ask you, Dirk, the same question I asked to the minister, which is really what would a good COP look like for you? What does success look like in Sharm el Sheikh? Yeah, I'll be the first one, but I think there are some other questions. Lady here, I think. Yeah, in the black. Oh, no, the lady here in the black first. Yeah.
Thank you. Laura Kolehmainen from the Left Alliance Parliamentary Group. I'm interested in the big picture. If up to 80% of states plan on utilizing international markets and offsetting in reaching their climate targets, I'm puzzled by who's then keeping score that there is enough capacity to do all of this. And shouldn't there be more states offering offsetting and things for the equation to work? And is there someone or some institution following this development? And additionally, I think this is connected to the concept of additionality. How does this square with that? Thank you.
Thank you. I think we have one more here.
Yeah, hi, is it on? Yes. Hi everyone, I'm Nicholas Kaskel, Chief Impact Officer at Compensate. A lot of talk about the need to raise integrity, but less talk about why, what's wrong, what are the flaws of the current market. And as Hanna-Mari said, it goes back to the projects themselves. And we've seen study after study recognizing these flaws. They might be lack of additionality, lack of permanence, et cetera, et cetera. So I think we need to also be very concrete when we name these things so that we don't just talk about increasing integrity, but actually identify what's wrong. But my question is more, how do we move forward in terms of assuring corresponding adjustments for the voluntary carbon market as well, so that the claims that companies make when they offset emissions are actually true? Or then do we just, because I'm pretty sure that companies will not accept what are called contribution claims or climate action claims because they cannot reach their climate goals of net zero or carbon neutrality with them. So what's the next step in terms of acknowledging this issue, making sure that all the countries that want to be involved with the voluntary carbon market in one way or the other take the necessary steps to assure corresponding adjustments for credits that are sold to the voluntary market? Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And I think we have one online question. Kari, maybe you could read that out too.
Thank you. As for Dirk, very specific about the role of CCS going forward. Carbon capture and storage.
Carbon capture and storage. Okay, so you've got a full plate there, Dirk.
I'll do my best. And a pity that I don't have the ability to have coffee hour with you guys to, or more importantly, the cocktail hour to work through some of these. For Sharma el-Sheikh, Ash, your question, not every COP is as big as a Paris COP or even a Glasgow COP in terms of the importance of the agenda items. Where we are in Sharma el-Sheikh is now we're in an implementation COP. That's kind of a different picture. We're beyond the broad principles and the accounting standards, for example, for Article 6, and we're into, let's talk about how we're going to use it, how are countries intending to use it. So in a sense, I'm going there in hopes of getting some progress report from the new supervisory body that's been set up for 6.4. This is kind of the new and improved version of a crediting mechanism at a UN level. But I'm also interested in hearing how countries are beginning to position themselves, whether they're buyers or sellers, and how they want to utilize the mechanisms. It's really important. This kind of blends into the second question, I think, around, you've got 80+% that have expressed interest, but most of them have not outlined a specific plan for how they intend to use international cooperation. I think this is going to be an important thing from the developing country side, and we've seen a bit of this already, of countries saying, I've got a new and improved target that I can deliver, a new and improved NDC, but it assumes international cooperation. It assumes Green Climate Fund finance. It assumes multilateral finance. It assumes Article 6 is working and that we get investment from the private sector. I think the place that we're not seeing as much definition is on the buy side. And maybe that has to do with gaining confidence in the 6.4 mechanism or in some of the improved integrity that's happening with the independent standards. Or maybe it's just domestic politics, like I'm sure you're familiar with in Finland, where, well, we're not sure if we need this. Do we really need this? If so, how should it be integrated? So I think we need more of those models to emerge. That's something that we at AIDA will be advancing, not just on the voluntary market side, but with governments saying, yeah, you do need to start to provide pathways, including the European Union. The European Union has a blind spot. and that is on natural climate solutions and storage in general. And right now, there is no way for the EU to achieve its mitigation goals of where it needs to get in 2040 or 2050 without removals. And there's no plan for it. That is going to involve removals in all likelihood from outside the borders of the EU. And it's something that we believe they need to accelerate work on. I'm glad to see initial signs, right, of study groups being set up and inquiries being established. But I think that's one place that you're going to start to see the reality set in. It's setting in Canada right now, even though Canada is blessed with large landmass and lots of mitigation potential in natural climate solutions. But it hasn't elaborated its plan yet of how it intends to engage. So I think the kind of thing that Mischa is exploring, he's a real trailblazer there with the KliK Foundation, that type of thing, I think you're going to see more countries stepping up. I know this is a very vibrant discussion in Japan right now, and it'll likely be built on the back of voluntary corporate commitments that have real teeth to them, but also include the ability to buy and use international credits. The question about who is following all of this, the data that we put out in that slide that I showed you of 2022 commitments, it's a lot easier this time than in the Paris era, because the NDCs, the way the formatting works is countries are given an opportunity to explain what their plans are for use of Article 6. So in fact, it all flows into the reports that are going to be made to the UN, and those reports are publicly available, and institutions like those in the room there or AIDA can go in and study to see how it all comes through. But I also think that this is where the data, particularly on the market side, that can be enhanced through the data trust that we're looking to establish is going to be really important, because we need to have, you know, a way of accessing the market information, everything in one place, so that you can kind of have confidence that the buys and sells match up, you know, that the transfer system is actually not enabling double counting, or that capturing all information needs. And on the question about whether the voluntary market should engage in corresponding adjustments or not, I personally expect an evolution in this regard. You know, it's one thing when your voluntary claim is one that you're going to make and you're going to turn those credits into the government, and the government's going to rely on those and will therefore make the corresponding adjustment. It's a different thing when the mitigation activity that you have underway is in a place where you also have emissions, and you may prefer for the credits never to leave that country. In that case, it's a voluntary action that might not need a corresponding adjustment. So I think we're going to see this evolve in a way that does have an increasing role for units with corresponding adjustments on the voluntary side. Right now, it's mysterious, right? There aren't very many examples of or maybe no examples of a credit that's moved across borders with a corresponding adjustment attached to it, and see all of the legal bells and whistles around it. So guys like me and Ash go back far enough to remember when the CDM had the same problem. Nobody had actually seen a credit issued, made it all the way through the CDM executive board, not only issued, but moved through the registry system and into a national account in Finland. We had never seen that. We didn't know all of the approvals that you had to have. And as a result, it was really slow and cumbersome at the beginning. And you wouldn't believe the amount of legal work that was done on all of the what ifs of what if the credit can't be transferred because the UN transfer system isn't up and running. So we've moved far beyond that with the CDM. We've got, we were able to stimulate billions in investment because there was clarity on it. But with Article 6, we don't have those instruments yet. So once we get some models, so that's why I love what the KliK Foundation and others in the market are trying to do right now is pave the way for that and take some of the mystery out. And I do think that once it's a commonplace thing to see how a government accepts a unit someplace, then I think voluntary markets can move in that direction pretty quickly. On finally, the CCS question. This is one I like. I just think there's a huge future in it, right? And in terms of the details around how you assure the permanence and how you assure the accurate measurement, just because it hasn't gotten as much attention at low price levels, I think that's going to change rapidly. That's an activity type that the United States is subsidizing through the tax code in a very substantial way. So I think the technology side itself should see more uptake, and the cost picture should improve with the economies of scale that can come with it. But I think it's just a huge growth sector and an important one to watch, because again, it doesn't look like we can get there without some form of storage, and CCS and direct air capture and similarly natural climate solutions are all hugely important for getting where we need to go.
For your very comprehensive presentation and questions, responses to the questions. Okay, so I think we've all been, well, all of you have been very, very patient. I hope you've enjoyed the discussion. I certainly have. I think it's been very insightful. I'm not going to do a summary. I mean, how can you summarize all that? But what I would say, and maybe you heard it here first, I think in Dirk's words there, he said Article 6 offers the greatest hope of delivering the Paris climate goals. So maybe I dropped the mic there. Thank you.